Good Thursday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for August the 3rd. Today we're reading together in 1 Samuel chapter 25, which is the story containing the main characters of David, Nabal, and Abigail, and the foolishness of Nabal, and how Abigail comes in and saves the day, really saves a whole lot of lives, and actually saves David in the process as well. We'll talk about that as we read through the text here. Let me get it up on the screen for us. We'll read along together today here in 1 Samuel chapter 25, beginning in verse number 1. And as we're reading through this, I encourage you to think about the situation that David has found himself in previously and how really the roles are reversed here, and how we, in some ways, see David behaving almost as Saul does. Let's think about that as we read this text together. 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verse number 1. 1 Samuel 25, verse number 1, Samuel died, and all Israel assembled to mourn for him, and they buried him by his home in Ramah. David then went down to the wilderness of Haran. A man of Maon had a business in Carmel. He was a very rich man with 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats, and was shearing his sheep in Carmel. The man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name Abigail. The woman was intelligent and beautiful, but the man, a Calebite, was harsh and evil in his dealings. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So David sent 10 young men, instructing them, "Go up to Carmel, and when you come to Nabal, greet him in my name. Then say this: Long life to you, and peace to you, peace to your family, and peace to all that is yours. I hear that you are shearing. When your servants were with us, we did not harass them. Nothing of theirs was missing the whole time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. So let my young men find favor with you, for we have come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have on hand to your servants and to your son David." David's young men went and said all these things to Nabal on David's behalf, and they waited. Nabal asked them, "Who is David? Who is Jesse's son? Many slaves these days are running away from their masters. Am I supposed to take my bread, my water, and my meat that I butchered for my shearers and give them to these men? I don't know where they are from." David's young men retraced their steps. When they returned to David, they reported all these words. He said to his men, "All of you, put on your swords." So each man put on his sword, and David also put on his sword. About 400 men followed David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of Nabal's young men informed Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he screamed at them. The men treated us very well. When we were in the field, we weren't harassed, and nothing of ours was missing the whole time we were living among them. They were a wall around us, day and night, the entire time we were with them, herding the sheep. Now consider carefully what you do, because there is certain to be trouble for our master and his entire family. He is such a worthless fool, nobody can talk to him." Abigail hurried, taking 200 loaves of bread, 2 clay jars of wine, 5 butchered sheep, a bushel of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she said to her male servants, "Go ahead of me, I will be right behind you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. She rode the donkey down a mountain pass, hidden from view. She saw David and his men coming toward her and met them. David had just said, "I guarded everything that belonged to this man in the wilderness for nothing. He was not missing anything, yet he paid me back evil for good. May God punish me and do so severely if I let any of his male servants survive until morning." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and knelt down with her face to the ground and paid homage to David. She knelt at his feet and said, "The guilt is mine, my lord. Please let your servant speak to you directly. Listen to the words of your servants. My lord should pay no attention to the worthless fool Nabal, for he lives up to his name. His name means stupid, and stupidity is all he knows. I, your servant, didn't see my lord's young men whom you sent. Now, my Lord, as surely as Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, it is Yahweh who kept you from participating in bloodshed and avenging yourself by your own hands. May your enemies and those who intend to harm my Lord be like Nabal. Let this gift your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive my servant's offense. Or please forgive your servant's offense. For Yahweh is certain to make a lasting destiny or dynasty for my Lord because he fights Yahweh's battles. Throughout your life, may evil not be found in you. Someone is pursuing you and intends to take your life. My Lord's life is tucked safely in the place where Yahweh your God protects the living, but he is flinging away your enemies' lives like stones from a sling. When Yahweh does for my Lord all the good things he promised you and appoints you ruler over Israel, there will not be remorse or a troubled conscience for my Lord because of needless bloodshed or my Lord's revenge. And when Yahweh does good things for my Lord, may you remember me, your servant. Then David said to Abigail, Blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. May your discernment be blessed, and may you be blessed. Today you kept me from participating in bloodshed and avenging myself by my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as Yahweh, God of Israel, lives, who prevented me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, Nabal wouldn't have any males left by morning light. Then David accepted what she had brought to him and said, Go home in peace. See, I have heard what you said and have granted your request. Then Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was in his house, holding a feast fit for a king. Nabal's heart was cheerful, and he was very drunk. So she didn't say anything to him until morning light. In the morning, when Nabal sobered up, his wife told him about these events. His heart died, and he became a stone. About 10 days later, Yahweh struck Nabal dead. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be Yahweh, who championed my cause against Nabal's insults and restrained his servant from doing evil. Yahweh brought Nabal's evil deeds back on his own head. Then David sent messengers to speak to Abigail about marrying him. When David's servants came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David sent us to bring you to him as a wife. She stood up, paid homage with her face to the ground, and said, Here I am, your servant, a slave to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. Then Abigail got up quickly, and her 5 female servants accompanying her rode on the donkey following David's messengers, and so she became his wife. David also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and the two of them became his wives. But Saul gave his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltai, son of Laish, who was from Galim. And that is 1 Samuel chapter 25. This text begins recognizing the death of Samuel. And Samuel obviously played a very key part in the history of Israel. He is the one who helped bring Israel and transition them from being a full-fledged theocracy with no king whatsoever on an earthly throne, at least, to being a true monarchy with a literal throne and a literal king sitting on it. So for him to pass here is a significant part in the story. The next detail that is given to us is that we have here this man, and the fact that his possessions are mentioned before who he actually is maybe should say something about the man in general. As one writer said, his possessions are greater than his character, recognizing that his possessions are mentioned first and spoken of in such great detail, as opposed to him as an individual, in which he has said he is to be harsh and evil in his dealings. We also see the beginning of this chapter that his character is contrasted with that of his wife Abigail, that she was intelligent and beautiful, not beautiful and intelligent, but she was intelligent and beautiful. And that obviously is going to play a huge part in the story. Now, the whole reason David has an interaction with this man is because this man, it was time for the shearing of sheep. It was a very festive time of the year because it showed the ways in which the sheep herder and the sheep owners, they were going to make a lot of money and really benefit from the shearing of sheep. You might compare the shearing of sheep from the time of harvest for a farmer. So here you have, or a crop farmer. Here you have this herder, and I guess Nabal would be the owner, and all of his herdsmen. They're shearing the sheep again for profit, and you can say that was the harvest of their, I guess, the sowing of crops, whatever you want to call it, with the sheep. So it's a very festive time. It's a good time. It's a time whenever there would be a great deal of celebrating. David recognizes this, and he sends his own people to go speak with Nabal to basically get him to share in the good things that he was enjoying because David had blessed him. How would David have blessed him? Well, David had blessed him in recognizing that Nabal was better off because of David. He had not only not messed with Nabal's herds, but he had basically protected them. The young man who speaks to Abigail later on says as much. They were a wall around us. Nobody bothered us. Nobody messed with us, and they didn't take anything from us either. The whole time they were around the herds. So it should have been. It was a reasonable request then for David to make of Nabal. So Nabal was having none of it. Remember, he was harsh, evil in his dealings. He was a fool. Abigail later on is just going to call him stupid, because he treats David as if he is nothing. Well, who's David? Everybody knows who David is. Everybody does. Remember, he's the one that killed tens of thousands, while the king himself had only killed thousands. You see the way that he just flat out disrespects him by what he says at the end of verse number 10. Well, many slaves these days are running from their masters. Obviously, a very backhanded statement against David, probably in reference to what's going on between David and Saul. Nabal refers to his bread, my water, and my meat for my shearers. There is no hospitality whatsoever being extended from Nabal toward David, which would have been, again, a custom of the time and of the culture that was very important to most people. Nabal obviously was not one of those people. Well, David takes great offense to this. And this is the place where really we see David taking the position of Saul, because in Saul's mind, he has been greatly offended by David. And so what does he do? He seeks out to get justice against David. Well, now David feels offense from Nabal. And what does he do? Well, he goes and he seeks justice against Nabal. How's he going to do that? Get your swords 3 times, put on your sword, or put on your swords, he says to everybody. So each man put on his sword, and David also put on his sword. What do you think that means? That swords mentioned 3 times, and that there are 400 men who are going out to war, that there's going to be war. Remember, 400 is a military number. If you see 400 men gathered, that means there's going to be military action in some way. Probably reminds us of what we see whenever Esau goes to meet Jacob, as we were talking about today or last night, in our Bible class, where Esau was going to go out to meet David with 400 men. That's a military number. So that's exactly what's going on here. David is going to go wipe out he's going to go wipe out Nabal's people. Now, again, one of his servants, Nabal's servants, went and told Abigail about this and told her the situation. Again, she is an intelligent woman, so she's going to do everything necessary in order to save everybody. Even though her husband's a fool, she recognizes that there's going to be many more people hurt because of his foolishness than just him. So she gathers all these supplies. She rides out. Let's see here. She rides out to meet David. David's still stewing about this. Verse number 21, I guarded everything that belonged to that man in the wilderness, and I did it for nothing. He was not missing anything. Yet he paid me back evil for good. May God punish me and do so severely if I let any of the males survive until morning. Again, that sounds a lot like Saul. We've seen that through the previous chapters with the way Saul thought of David. Now David's thinking that way of Nabal. And it also very much contrasts with the previous chapters in which David recognized that it was Yahweh who's going to take vengeance. He forgets that here in this moment until Abigail steps into David's position. So what we've basically seen is David takes the position of Saul, and then Abigail takes the position of David. Abigail's the one speaking truth and wisdom into David, just as David spoke truth and wisdom into Saul in the previous chapter. She comes to him, and there's 4 times within verses 26 to 35 in which she speaks, or David speaks, of this being Yahweh's deliverance of David. That Yahweh has come through Abigail and has spoken to David so that he is spared from making a terrible decision. Abigail takes the blame for herself. Pay no attention to him. I'll take the blame for this. Nabal, he's a worthless fool. He lives up to his name. His name means stupid, and stupidity is all that he knows. So please just ignore him. I will do my best to rectify this. I didn't see your young men coming to my young men. I didn't see that. If I would have, things would have been different. So she tries to smooth things over and then speaks of Yahweh. It is Yahweh who kept you from participating in bloodshed and avenging yourselves. He says later on again, let's see here in verse number 32. Verse number 32, David said to Abigail, "Blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. You kept me from participating in bloodshed and avenging myself by my own hand." So he specifically says Abigail, but he attributes her coming to him to Yahweh, that he sent you. See it again in verse 34. "As surely as Yahweh, God of Israel lives, who prevented me from harming you." Again, Yahweh is the one who does this. Verse number 39, "Blessed be Yahweh, who championed my cause against Nabal's insults and restrained his servant from doing evil." Yahweh brought Nabal's evil deeds back on his own head. So in all this, we recognize that, yes, Abigail played a big part. But at the end of the day, it's what Yahweh does. And that's something we've been stressing all throughout this story is look at what God is doing. Look at how David in the previous chapter says God's going to take care of this. And then he forgets that in a moment of rage. It's almost like a bull sees red and just goes crazy and wants to get revenge. I'm sure there was some male ego involved in this as well. I can fully confess that as a male myself. There's probably male ego involved here on both sides, on Nabal's side and also David's side here. But here is Abigail reminding David of these truths, reminding him of the things that God sees in the situation and things that God has promised him. Because that's one of the points that she makes is, you don't want to do this because in the future, whenever God makes you king, you don't want to have this hanging over you. You don't want to have this this shedding of blood and avenging of yourselves. You don't want that to be hanging over your conscience. So please don't do this. And David, to his credit, hears her. He doesn't just hear her, but he listens. He listens to her and concedes the truth to which she is speaking, or concedes to the truth that she is speaking, and does not go through with what he was planning on doing. And he blesses her. "Go home in peace. See, I have heard what you have said and have granted your request to not just obliterate Nabal and his whole family, his whole everything about the man was spared because of Abigail's kindness and also just quick-wittedness, doing what was necessary to spare her husband and everything that he owned from David's vengeance." Now she goes back, she was going to tell Nabal about this, but he's having a party because, again, he's just a selfish fool. So he's getting drunk at the party. She says, "Me talking to him right now isn't going to do anything, so I'll tell him in the morning." Whenever she does, says that his heart died. His heart died. Literally, his heart died within him. I don't know if he had a heart attack. I don't know if that's exactly what was going on. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe he had a heart attack because of what took place. But very specifically, we know that his punishment is attributed to Yahweh, because about 10 days later, Yahweh struck Nabal dead. In case there was any wondering if the heart attack or whatever it was just natural, we know that his death was caused by Yahweh. Why? Because he was a fool. And just as David did not want to harm God's anointed, did not want to even disrespect God's anointed in the previous chapter, Nabal had no such qualms. He didn't care to disrespect Yahweh's anointed, and he suffered for that. David appreciates Abigail so much that he ends up bringing her into the family as a wife. And there's another woman, Ahinoam, that he brings in as well. And then we have the interesting tidbit at the end of chapter 25 and verse number 24 that Saul gave his wife Michal, David's wife, to Palti, whatever it is, son of Laish, who was from Galim. Why? Well, it reminds me a lot of Samson, the Samson story. Remember, he just left the chick, the Philistine woman, behind, and then came back later on, and she'd already been given to somebody else. It seems that kind of the thing here is that David's on the run. He's no longer back home. He's in the wilderness. He's been gone for who knows how long. And Saul doesn't want his daughter to be abandoned. He wants her to be cared for, so he ends up giving her to another man. So that's what we have here in chapter 25. Do you have any questions or comments about what's in this text? If you do, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. The main theme, though, for this chapter, I would say, is God continues to provide. And this time, and just previously, God has saved David from others. God has saved David from Saul, for instance. But now God has saved David from himself. God has saved David from himself. He continues to provide for his anointed. And that's going to continue to be the case as we go throughout this story, the saga of David versus Saul. Tomorrow, we're going to see where David has another opportunity to end this if he wants to, but he doesn't. He shows mercy and grace. We'll read about that tomorrow in 1 Samuel chapter 26. Hope you'll tune in then. Have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone. Take care and God bless.